أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم برضوان إلى يوم الدين. So today is day 4. And we are going to be covering the third juz of the Quran today. And I would like to focus on 3 sections in Surah Al-Baqarah today. First is the one about Ayatul Kursi. The second section is the verse number 282. Which deals with documentation of all your transactions. And then the last will be the last 2 verses of the Quran, the beautiful dua that we all memorize and we all make and we all go through it constantly, and just want to go over some of the features of it, some of the lessons that we can draw from those 2 verses. So when you look at Surah Ayatul Kursi, and the first word of Ayatul Kursi is Allah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is starting with His name. And as He is starting with His name, the rest of the verses of this ayat, what is known as Ayatul Kursi, deal with all of His sifat, all of His attributes. That is important for our iman, that is important for us to keep our focus on. Oftentimes in our culture, this ayah is taken as some magic words that you utter, and as a result you receive protection from Allah. Whereas I think the real lesson that it tries to instill in us is about His qualities. And if you truly believe in these qualities and reflect on these qualities, then what it necessarily should mean is that we have no one to fear. That the fear, the idea that something can happen to you outside of the realm of Allah is negated by it. And so it's a very important verse in that sense, that in terms of our aqidah, not just aqidah in the theoretical sense, but what is really in our consciousness as we go through the life is reflected in this powerful ayah. And it is known as Ayatul Kursi, which means the seat of power, and so that itself conveys that all powers belong to Allah. And so it starts out with some of the very basic fundamental tenet of our faith, that Allahu la ilaha illa huwa, that there is no God except He. There is no one else who can be worshipped except Him. There is no one else who can be a master owner except Him. There is no one else who can rule over us or any part of this universe or anything else in the universe except Him. And so this is the basic fundamental tenet of our faith. And this statement contains all of that's coming. I mean, He's La ilaha illa huwa means He's all of what is coming is a reflection of why He is the only Allah. So it starts with the most fundamental, most basic of Allah, His name, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa, that there is no God except Him. And so it continues from that. It describes Him in detail about what are the relationships of all of His other sifat, with Him being the Lord. And oftentimes we look at these sifat as belonging to Allah, but in reality Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us by delineating some of His sifat that all of it belongs to Him. But in this context He is particularly pointing to some of His sifat that deal with his control, with his knowledge on us and on the world in which we live. Otherwise, there is no sifa, there is no quality that you can imagine that does not belong to Allah. Because Allah is complete, Allah is full, Allah is whole. And there is nothing that our mind can imagine about a being, that this quality may occur in a being. All of that belongs to Allah. So the very first quality that he describes, we of any other being, what we come to know very first is if a person is alive. And so the very first quality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes about himself, Al-Hayyul Qayyum, that he is not only alive, he is constantly alive. That there was no beginning to him and no end to him, so he was alive when nothing else was alive. And he will be alive when nothing else will be alive. He will stand on that continuously. So Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayy al-qayyum, he will stand, he will remain on that forever. And then not only that he is constantly alive, there is no moment in this world, in this universe, where you may say that he is neglecting the universe, or that he is not fully in control, or that he goes through some kind of sleep or dozing off that will result in him losing that control. So la ta'khudhu sinnatun wala nawm. So this is his distinct quality that does not belong to other life that we see around us. The living beings, the living creatures that we see, they all go through these periods in which they are unaware of the environment in which they live. They get tired. They lose control over themselves. So in this case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pointing that he is constantly attentive to the world in which attentive to the universe and the world. And lahu ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard, that everything belongs to him, whatever lies in the heaven and the earth. Man zal ladhi yashfa'u indahu illa bi'idhnihi. So what this particular statement conveys is that no one in the universe has any power to influence him, to influence what he does, to influence how he acts, to influence what he decides. No one can have any saying in that. He alone is the all-powerful, in control over his decisions and his powers over all the other human beings. And so in that case, man zal ladhi yashfa'u indahu illa bi'idhnihi. So the concept of shifa is something that is very common in human cultures and human society and human history, where we want some means through which we can approach someone most powerful. We carry this, that because especially in this world, most of the powerful, especially the powers that are gained by human beings, they make themselves above everyone else, and they make themselves unapproachable. And so with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he can be approached directly. There's no need for any means to reach him. Not only there is no need, nothing else will be of any benefit or influence in terms of affecting his decision and his dealings with his servants and people around him, except maybe those whom he honors and invites to speak. And so that's the only exception that sometimes Quran makes. And what is the nature of that exception is something that we are not fully able to comprehend in this world, because the whole process belongs to not this world, but the next world. يَعْلَمُ مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمَا خَلْفَهُمْ. And then it comes to his knowledge and perfection of his knowledge, that there is nothing that lies outside of the perfection of His knowledge. He is aware, He knows everything. And so this also sometimes causes some difficulty of understanding for us. For example, we are the ones whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala holds responsible for our own actions. And He says, I will reward you if you do this, and I will punish you if you do otherwise. But at the same time, His knowledge is so perfect that He knows what we are going to do. And so these two facts are difficult to reconcile in our minds. But that is the case. And how that happens, how that occurs, is something that we are unable to comprehend fully because of our limited knowledge, limited vision, limited environment that we are aware of, that we cannot really fully get into fully understanding that. But what we must take, if Allah who says that I have all the powers, and then He says that you have to choose, then it must be our choice. And we must take care of how we act, how we move forward. And so His knowledge is perfect. And no one else can comprehend His knowledge. And that includes what I just said, that no one else will be able to get any part of that. Knowledge is so comprehensive and so expansive that whatever we may think of knowledge will be not even a dot in that whole spectrum of knowledge. And so this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in other parts of the Quran says that if all the seas were converted to ink, and if all the trees were converted into pens, and you are to start writing His kalimat, His words, then they will all be depleted, and the words will remain to be written. And then even if He replenishes it over 7 times, that's not sufficient. And so you can imagine the disparity of knowledge between us and what knowledge belongs to Allah. A tiny speck of what Allah has taught us and made us aware of in this world. And everything else belongs to Allah. So we cannot come out and start to claim about Allah in ways in which we have absolutely no knowledge to put any limitations or any descriptions on Him, except the way He describes Himself. And even in these verses, as He's describing Himself as that He doesn't go to sleep, He doesn't doze off, He has all the knowledge, He sits on the seats of power. These words are used to instill in our limited vocabulary, in our limited understanding, some semblance of what His power is like. But His power is limitless and beyond even this description which is being given for human beings to be able to comprehend these words. So in that sense, I think this verse conveys some of the very important attributes of Allah. And I think the real significance of this ayah is not that you recite it as some kind of magical words, but that it instills in our consciousness this imagination of Allah, this quality of Allah, this all-powering Allah, after which everything else becomes powerless. And if everything else becomes powerless, then so if you are afraid of something, then you recite this ayah, and then that fear should go away. And if you still carry that fear in your heart, then means you haven't really instilled in yourself the real concepts that the surah is trying to convey. And so that's an important lesson that I think we should look at when we recite this verse, Ayatul Kursi, the famous verse that almost every Muslim memorizes and every Muslim recites, but we oftentimes recite it culturally as a means of some protection. But I think we need to look at these verses beyond that. And our protection lies in this realization of who Allah is. and then depending on Him, rather than some magic happening as a result of some certain words coming out of our tongues. The second part of this third juz in this, again remaining in Surah Al-Baqarah, is the longest verse of the Quran. This verse number 282 is the longest verse of the Quran. There is no other verse that comes to the length that this verse is. And so this verse contains almost, in the Qurans that are printed these days, especially the 604-page Qurans, you will find that this verse takes up the whole page. And it conveys a very important principle in our social transactions and interactions. First of all, there must be clarity in it as to what the transaction is. It cannot be left to vague transactions. Second thing is, it must be documented and recorded. So Quran teaches us a lot about a moral reform of the people and relying on people's piety and righteousness and goodness, and relying on being able to trust a person because you think that person is righteous and that person is pious. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us that in the matters of this world, in the transactions that we do amongst each other, the importance of documentation and the importance of that there are others involved in witnessing it and documenting it. I mean, especially the important ones. There's another verse in the Quran which talks about everyday things. You just stand there and handing something over to someone and taking something back in a real-time transaction. Those do not come under this instruction. But the transactions of the kind which are long-term, which carry over, which have any significance or importance attached to it, in which there can be a doubt later on, in those cases, documentation is absolutely essential. And not only documentation is essential, this verse contains the command. Not just a recommendation, but a command that when you do such transactions, then you must document them. You must make a witness over them. And then there are situations and circumstances in which it is possible that that was left out. And in those cases, then you rely on people's faith in Allah and rely on people's righteousness and their sense of accountability before Allah to recall something under extraordinary circumstances. But under normal circumstances, documentation is an important part of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us in terms of how we deal with other human beings around us, how we interact with them, how we run our affairs with other human beings around us. So that's just a short emphasis on the purpose and meaning of that long verse, the longest verse in the Quran, which is verse 282 of Surah Al-Baqarah. Then we come to the last two verses of the surah. Amana Rasulu bima unzila ilayhi min rabbihi wal mu'minun kullun amana billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusulihi la nufarriqu bayna ahadin min rusulihi wa qalu sami'na wa ta'na ghufranaka rabbana ilaykal masir. So it describes the Prophet believing himself in what was revealed to him, and the believers believing along with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if you recall the beginning of this surah, which started with the verse ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, and it contained the description of that hidayah and who will be able to benefit from this hidayah. This is the conclusion of this surah, where it is preparing you now that you have come to know the hidayah, its characteristics, now that you have come to know the pitfalls that you must avoid, then you must adopt this sense, this attitude, this thinking in yourself, that how you you approach the world when you have instilled that iman in yourself. So iman has some of the basic characteristics. Of course, if you remove your belief in the messengers, and messengers being appointed by Allah, and messengers receiving direct communication from Allah, then the whole basis of iman is taken away. So it's a very important part of including the messengers into this belief in Allah. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs of iman. So alladhina yu'minuna bil ghaib is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described in the beginning of the surah. So part of that part of that ghaib, that thing that is hidden, is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs us of His world. And among them is His malaika. So among them His malaika carries the distinction that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically mentions malaika in terms of our iman bil ghaib. Then because it is so essential in belief in the messenger itself. That how does the messenger receive the communication? Who communicates Allah's message to the messengers? It is the malaika who communicate that. It is the Jibrail who brought the message to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he cannot remove that from it. So that becomes also an essential part of the belief in Allah. And then not to distinguish and differentiate between all the messengers whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent. So that also talks against any kind of parochialism that the human beings constantly develop, that ours is better than yours kind of conversations that oftentimes develop amongst human beings. That when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making you a trustee of His hidayah, then when He has given this to you, when He asks you to believe in it, then He says that from Adam alayhi salam up until Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, everyone received the same message. And so we cannot distinguish between them, and we must know that they all were equally communicated by Allah and were given the same principles, although these implementations and its practical shape may have been different. But the basic message, the fundamental concepts were exactly the same among all of these messengers. And then if you truly believe in Allah, if you believe in the Prophet, if you believe in this hidayah, then you have no choice but to obey. قَالُوا سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا غُفْرَانَكَ رَبَّنَا وَإِلَيْكَ الْمَصِيرُ. Then you must adopt obedience to the message that is that you have accepted, that you say you believe in, you have adopted. So you cannot differentiate, separate your practice from your actual faith and your belief. Your practice must match your belief, and if there is a disparity between the two, then either your iman is not complete or you are refusing to follow and obey. In both cases, it's a problem. Whether your iman is not weak and not complete, or you are actively rebelling against Allah and saying you are not going to follow and obey. In both cases, it's a problem. So, وَقَالُوا سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا, you must obey. And then we also understand the weaknesses which Allah has put in us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself recognizes خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, we have created man weak. And that weakness is there with a purpose, where we have to struggle constantly against our weaknesses to become what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala desires from us. And because of those weaknesses, we will always have shortcomings. We will make mistakes sometimes, because finding hidayah, agreeing to that hidayah, implementing that hidayah, running our life based on that hidayah is dependent on a struggle that we must do to find that hidayah, to come to accept that hidayah. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides us with principles and foundations of how to act in this world, but we find ourselves surrounded by situations and circumstances that we have to think for our own self as to what they are. And so in that case, we need to come up with what is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala desires from us, and how should we act in a particular situation and circumstances. And so in that cases we can make mistakes. And so there Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us, غُفْرَانَكَ رَبَّنَا وَإِلَيْكَ الْمَصِيرُ, that we seek His forgiveness and protection from those mistakes that we make. But our submission must be absolute. And whatever we do, we must do with this idea of submission, this idea of obedience. And then with that idea, if we still make mistakes, then in that case Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you can seek His forgiveness and He's going to forgive you regarding it. La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wusaha, that Allah does not put a burden on any soul greater than He is capable of. So again, this verse causes a lot of misunderstandings oftentimes. That when we find something hard to do, we think that we don't have enough strength to do something, and so it is not binding on us. Or we take leave from stuff that we ourselves think that it is so difficult for me, so it must not be something that is binding on me. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describing La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wusaha, that whatever He demands from us. So this is an important part when we read Quran as a book of Hidayah. When we say Ihdina sirat al-mustaqim, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers that with Zalik al-kitabu la rayba fi, then it contains all of that Hidayah from beginning to the end. Then we cannot choose ourselves as to what is binding on us, what applies to us and what does not apply to us. We do not have that freedom to make that choice. That is how I understand this verse. La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wusaha, because Allah is not going to demand from us. And whatever He has demanded from us in Quran is something that we are capable of. And whatever we are not capable of, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to demand from us for that. So La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wusaha, laha ma kasabat wa alayha maktasabat. So when you remove that choice, then what remains is what you earn by trying to implement that Hidayah in your life, by trying to do the things that He demands from us. And we earn our life in the hereafter based on trying to go on that path, that sirat al-mustaqim, and implementing all of that in our life. And in that way, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that is the only thing that belongs to you, is your kasab, is what you earn, the effort you make to earn that. And so here kasab, in this dunya, in this world, we use the concept for kasab, of earning, as something as a result of some activity you do. So you go through your job, you go through your work, you go through cultivating land, and at the end you receive a reward, a salary, something that is your kasab, and that becomes yours. So what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here means by kasab is not the kasab in this world, what you earn in this world, because in this world there is nothing but work. This is the part of the job. This is the part where you make the effort. This is the part where you are working. And when you finish your work, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give you your earning, your reward. So, lahama kasabat wa alayya maktasabat is not something that you should think about it in this world, but it is all in the hereafter, in the next world where your earnings will be there. In this world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the only thing that will be, that is important for you to focus on is your effort. وَأَلَّيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى. For man belongs in this world nothing but the effort that he makes, and it is only his effort that he is going to see. And so your reward is based on how much work you did. Not exactly what you were able to achieve, but how much work you did. And based on that work, so here in this ayah, the concept of laha ma kasabat wa alayya maktasabat applies to our activities, our actions. That is what is going to result in our action, and in our reward and our earning in Akhirah. And so you see that Quran from the beginning to the end is a book of action. It is a book of action that constantly invites to stand up, to do something, to think something, to observe something, and to deal with people in certain ways. And so in all those cases, this is a book of action. And then the last few part of the dua that this two verses contain: Rabbana la tu'akhidhna in nasina wa akhtana, Rabbana wa la tahmil alayna isran kama hamaltahu ala alladhina min qablina, Rabbana wa la tuhammilna ma la taqata lana bihi, wa'fu anna waghfir lana warhamna anta maulana fansurna ala alqawmil kafirin. So this conveys a very essential reality. Just like Surah Fatiha, even though it was a dua, it taught us certain important concepts about the deen, and as I mentioned in my first session, that was the seed from which the whole Quran grew. And so in this case, this dua is also something that is teaching us something very essential, very important. That once you come to recognize the Hidayah, once you come to believe in it, once you come to accept it, once you start to submit to it and obey it, once you start to act on the basis of it, then you are definitely going to face difficulties, persecution, opposition, hardship in this world. And so you see how it contrasts with the idea of La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wusaha. That concept of La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wusaha does not preclude or exclude that you are going to face hardship. Hardship that is going to trouble you, hardship that you will find of great pain for you. And in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches what attitude we should carry. And so the hardship is, for following this deen, the hardship primarily comes from shaitan in terms of our own nafs, and primarily comes for those who rebel against Allah, who refuse to believe in Him. And so it's a human struggle where human societies and human cultures and human powers will work against you, stand up opposing you. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he received the first revelation at the age of 40 years, he was the most trusted person in the community, the most accepted person in the community, to whom everyone looked up to whom everyone brought anything that needed to be safeguarded and put in trust. He was the banker of all the people around him. If he said something, people will accept it. If there is a dispute and they bring him in to resolve the dispute, they will take his word for it. He was from among them, and he was the son of the soil as anyone could be. But upon this few words of revelation of Iqra bismi rabbika allazi khalaq, that whole society turned against him. And anyone else who came to believe him also turned against them. And so there was no limit to their persecutions and causing pain and causing difficulties and putting blocks before them. And so in that case, as you can understand that the ayah La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wusaha is not of a human determination, but Allah's determination. But in this world, that is what is going to happen. Now it teaches us a very important lesson. The Mufassirin described that the period of revelation for this dua, this last verse of Surah Al-Baqarah, was during the peak of persecution in Makkah. Before Prophet ﷺ's migration, when the persecution was at its peak in Makkah, that's when this dua came down. And so what attitude is this dua teaching us? In the face of persecution, in the face of opposition, in the face of whatever those believers were facing, what is the attitude that Quran is teaching? First of all, you will see that in this whole dua, there is no expression of anger or resentment. Absolutely none. And this is one of the hardest things to act on. That when you see people turn against you, put blocks before you, make life difficult for you just because of your belief, just because of your practice, then we develop this anger, this resentment against such people. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us as an attitude where you cannot carry that resentment, that anger in yourself when you face such situations and circumstances. And He brings the focus inward rather than outwards. Although they ask Allah, Rabbana la tu'akhizna in nasina waqtana, oh Allah, maybe it is something we forgot or mistakes we made. And so the only thing they worry is not that the persecutors and what they are doing, but removing the likelihood that they themselves may be committing mistakes, may be forgetting something, that they are safeguarded under pressure of persecution, that they can safeguard themselves from going into directions that they are not supposed to go. So, Rabbana la tu'akhizna in nasina aw akhta'na. And then they ask Allah, not that everything should stop, but they ask Allah and they understand that Allah is going to take them through those tests. They understand that. But they ask, Rabbana wala tahmil alayna isran kama hamaltahu ala allazina min qablina. They don't put on us burden greater than we can bear, and more than and like what you put on those before us. And then they turn to Allah and they seek forgiveness and istighfar, and there is no expression of anger or resentment in this whole dua, revealed during the peak of persecution in Makkah. And so this is what teaches us the attitude, that once you accept the hidayah, once you obey Allah, when you start on this path, once you start to fulfill the demands that this hidayah makes on you, then you are definitely going to face hardship, opposition, difficulties. There is no way around it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not describe any messenger in Quran who did not face severe opposition from the people and society to whom they were sent. And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was no exception. And if it is our belief that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the last of the messengers, then and we who stand to fulfill the mission that belonged to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and as the last prophet, as last messenger, that how can we think that there will be an exception for us? We will certainly face similar circumstances, but our attitude, our psychology, our way of thinking with regards to all that we will face is beautifully taught us in this dua, in this surah. Just like Surah Fatiha taught us such important foundational, fundamental lessons as a dua coming from within your heart, this is also trying to make it, instill it in our subconscious as our inner voice that's coming out to be able to deal with the difficult world that we find ourselves surrounded by. So I'm going to conclude here. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.